40,000 soldiers. Let me say it again. 40,000. Not on the plains of Europe, not under a NATO banner, but right there in the dust and heat of Burkina Faso. For too long, they told Africa, you are too weak, you cannot stand. You must wait for Paris, for Washington, for foreign flags to protect you. But today, my brothers and sisters, that lie has been shattered. A young African leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has lifted his voice without words. Through action, his army now outnumbers the entire forces of some European nations. His march declares that sovereignty is not a gift. Sovereignty is seized, defended, lived. Hear me clearly. This is not just Ibrahim Traoré news. This is Africa's news. This is your news. So before we go further, I invite you, hit that subscribe button right now. Because if you don't hear Africa's voice here, you may never hear it at all. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Your living room, your kitchen table, your phone on the bus? Because what is happening in Burkina Faso is not only moving soldiers, it is moving history. And when 40,000 men take their stand, the world must stop and reckon with the sound. 40,000 soldiers. Let the weight of that number sink in. For a nation so often dismissed as small, fragile, dependent, 40,000 troops moving in unison is nothing short of a trumpet blast announcing a new era. This is the decision of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young man in fatigues who has become the center of both admiration and alarm. With one command, he orchestrated the largest single military mobilization in Burkina Faso's modern history. Not 500, not 5,000, but 40,000 men, women, and volunteers stepping forward to seal the northern border, to hold the line against militants who have tormented villages for years. The official explanation is simple enough: to block the armed groups who cross the Sahel carrying weapons, money, and terror. But beneath the official reason lies a deeper story, a story about dignity, about sovereignty, about a nation tired of waiting for others to do its fighting. Think of the farmer in the Sahel. For 3 years, he planted his crops only to see them burned by men with guns who appeared at dusk and vanished at dawn. His children learned to hide when strangers came down the road. Then one morning he looks up and sees a column of soldiers on that same road, boots where bandits once stood, a uniform where fear once reigned. For him, those 40,000 are not a statistic. They are the line between fleeing once again or finally staying to plant in peace. Think of the teacher in Kaya. He once dismissed his class early because the children could hear gunfire outside the village. He watched their little eyes glance to the window, not toward the chalkboard. Weeks after the deployment, he told reporters, "Now the children walk home without looking over their shoulders." That is not geopolitics. That is survival transforming into dignity. And think of the mother in the Sahel who used to press her children under the bed when the night cracked with gunfire. Weeks later, she told a radio host, "Now the only sound I hear at night is crickets." That is not militarization. That is liberation. Yet here, my friends, lies the paradox. When NATO moves soldiers, it is called strategic. When Poland places nearly the same number on its border, Western newspapers praise it as defensive and necessary. But when Ibrahim Traoré moves 40,000 men inside Burkina Faso, the vocabulary changes. Authoritarian, concerning, dangerous. The facts remain the same. It is only the storyteller who changes the tone. This is why we must not only look at numbers, but also listen to narratives. Because the battle is not only on the border, it is in the headlines, the op-eds, the TV panels where Africa is too often portrayed as incapable of self-defense. Traoré's order challenged not just the militants, but the assumptions that kept the continent on its knees. Brothers and sisters, hear me. 40,000 soldiers did not just march against bandits. They marched against the idea that Africa must always ask permission before it acts. The world has seen Burkina Faso as a fragile land. But in that moment of mobilization, fragility gave way to force, and dependency gave way to dignity. This is why the deployment matters. It is not only about security, it is about sovereignty. It is about a people learning to see themselves not as beggars of protection, but as builders of their own shield. And yet, as powerful as this moment is, the story does not end here. Because when thousands of citizens, students, farmers, workers, began to line up before dawn, carrying school papers, wearing sandals, holding nothing but their faith in the nation. Something even more shocking unfolded. The true earthquake was not in the marching columns of soldiers, but in the endless lines of volunteers ready to trade comfort for sovereignty. And that wave of courage is where our story rises to its climax. When the call went out, something extraordinary happened. Burkina Faso's government expected hundreds, maybe thousands, to answer. But before the sun had even risen, stadiums were already filled. Farmers walked miles in sandals, their feet caked in dust. Students carried their school certificates to prove their age. Young men brought backpacks still stuffed with books. It was not about money, because there was hardly any pay to offer. It was not about glory, because the world's cameras were not there. It was about something more ancient, more powerful, the belief that sovereignty was worth trading comfort for. In Bobo Dioulasso, a father watched as his teenage son put on a uniform for the first time. Tears welled in his eyes, not of fear, but of pride. At least now, he said, my son fights for us, not for them. Those words echo louder than any speech, louder than any analyst's chart. They speak of ownership, of a bond between people and state that cannot be borrowed from abroad. This wave unsettled foreign observers, because armies can be trained, yes. Weapons can be bought, yes. But spirit cannot be imported. Spirit is born in the dust of villages, in the sweat of farmers, in the courage of students. And that spirit is what lined up by the thousands, volunteering not for wages, but for dignity. Western analysts, accustomed to describing Africa's youth as restless and disengaged, had no category for this. They wrote of militarization, of authoritarian drift, yet their very words only deepened the loyalty at home. Because here lies a human truth. When outsiders criticize, insiders unite. We have seen this instinct in America itself. When foreign governments attack U.S. policy, surveys show that public support for that same policy often rises. Pride hardens when insulted. The same psychology unfolded in Burkina Faso. In Ouagadougou, a shopkeeper pasted a photo of Captain Traoré in his window after reading an article that called the deployment reckless. When asked why, he smiled and said, "If they hate it so much, maybe it means he is doing something right." That shop window, my friends, became a sermon in its own right, because people prefer to criticize their leaders at home, in private, but will defend them fiercely when outsiders cast stones. This is why international condemnation rang hollow. France, once ever present in Burkina Faso's affairs, could barely whisper. ECOWAS, usually quick to condemn, remained silent. Washington think tanks filled television panels with warnings of instability. But in the villages, in the towns, in the hearts of ordinary people, the mood was not fear, it was pride. And pride is contagious. It spreads faster than fear when people finally feel seen. Think again of the stadiums filled with applicants. Think of the farmer who left his field to carry nothing but his sandals. Think of the student who put aside dreams of leaving for Europe and instead raised his hand for enlistment. These images do more than fill recruitment lists. They rewrite the narrative of an entire continent. For years, Africans were told that the young were eager only to migrate, restless only to escape. Yet here was a line of young men and women willing to stand, not to flee, willing to protect, not to abandon. That, my friends, is a shift so profound, it unsettles not just borders, but entire assumptions. And yet, with every act of pride comes a shadow of risk. Mobilization of this scale is not without cost. Families wondered if their sons would return. Mothers worried if this burst of courage would invite new dangers. The atmosphere carried both tension and hope, two emotions entwined like strands of rope, each pulling in opposite directions. Still, one truth grew louder: legitimacy. An army built on volunteers cannot be dismissed as a dictator's plaything. It carries the weight of the people's choice. And that legitimacy is precisely what worries foreign capitals more than any rifle or tank. This, then, is the climax. Not merely the march of 40,000 boots, but the march of a nation's spirit, refusing to bow. But every climax carries us forward. The story does not stop in the stadiums or on the roads. Because once soldiers stood at the borders, they did not only guard villages, They stood over mines, over gold, over resources that for too long flowed outward while poverty stayed home. And when 40,000 troops stand guard, not just at borders but at the gates of gold, the meaning of sovereignty shifts from survival to economy. And that, my friends, is where the battle truly begins. The soldiers did not only march to the northern border, they marched to the goldfields, to the places where, for decades, the ground yielded treasure for foreign trucks while villages nearby remained poor. For too long, Burkina Faso's mines were treated as open vaults, watched by outsiders, guarded by outsiders, and drained by outsiders. The wealth left the soil at night under foreign protection, while the people who lived on that soil struggled to send their children to school. But this time was different. This time, it was Burkina Faso soldiers, not foreign contractors, who stood guard at the gates. And in that simple image, the rifle slung across the shoulder of a local soldier by a mine entrance, history itself seemed to flip. Here lies the contradiction so sharp it cuts without a blade. When France stationed troops to guard uranium in Niger, Western analysts called it a strategic partnership. When Burkina Faso sends its own men to guard gold, headlines call it nationalism or isolation. What is praised in Paris is condemned in Ouagadougou. A miner outside the capital told a reporter, "For years I watched foreign trucks pass through the night while my children ate little. But now when I see soldiers at the mine, I feel for the first time that maybe this gold will touch our children's future." That sentence, my friends, is worth more than any market price. Because wealth is not just about currency. Wealth is about whether hope flows homeward or outward. And this is where the true consequence of 40,000 troops reveals itself. It is not only about chasing bandits away, it is about protecting the very resources that give a nation leverage. It is about turning sovereignty from an idea into a material fact. Investors warned that militarization would scare away business. But history offers another lesson. Many investors, whether in Africa or elsewhere, prefer stability above all. And stability, even when enforced by soldiers, can be more attractive than the chaos of unchecked violence. What if the real question is not whether troops drive investors away, but whether they force investors to negotiate on African terms? This possibility rattles foreign capitals, because for decades contracts were signed with pens held in Paris, London, or Toronto, while African hands held little more than dust. If the balance of negotiation shifts, if resources are defended first by local soldiers, then the entire game changes. Think of the psychology at play. In America, surveys show that citizens feel safer when they see a police car outside their neighborhood, even if crime rates have not changed. Why? Because presence matters. Presence turns fear into trust. In Burkina Faso, the presence of soldiers at the mines tells workers, "This belongs to you. It is guarded for your children, not someone else's account overseas." That shift cannot be measured in statistics. It can only be measured in dignity. And dignity, once awakened, cannot easily be put back to sleep. Of course, pride and risk walk hand in hand. Resource wealth has long been both blessing and curse across Africa. Gold may attract prosperity, but it also attracts conflict. The question is whether Burkina Faso can hold its line long enough to turn this moment into lasting change. This is why the consequence of 40,000 troops is not only military, it is economic, it is psychological, it is generational. It tells a people that they are not beggars of their own wealth, but guardians of it. And that message, more than bullets or boots, is what unsettles old powers. Because if one nation guards its mines, another will follow. If one nation negotiates on its own terms, others will demand the same. And if that domino begins to fall, the entire balance of global extraction shifts. So let me place the question before you. My brothers and sisters, do you believe soldiers guarding resources can bring justice, or will it bring new struggles? Your answer matters, because sovereignty is not only won on the battlefield, it is also tested in the marketplace. And as troops stand over gold, the eyes of the world turn not just to mines, but to meaning itself. What does sovereignty mean when headlines in Paris scream militarization, while mothers in Ouagadougou whisper liberation? That clash of voices is where our story turns next. Silence can speak louder than words. And in West Africa, the silence after Traoré's decision was deafening. ECOWAS, a body that usually rushes to condemn any disruption, avoided direct confrontation. Statements were delayed, softened, or left unsaid. Neighboring governments, caught between admiration and fear, whispered in corridors but refused to put their thoughts on paper. Some saw sovereignty in action. Others feared that such bold mobilization might spill across their own fragile borders. France, once omnipresent in the affairs of Burkina Faso, was reduced to whispers and unnamed concerns. Once it was French troops who roamed the Sahel. Now France has been pushed aside, watching from a distance, its influence shrinking into shadows. The nation that had long dictated security policy in Ouagadougou could only mutter through think tanks and opinion pages. And then came Washington. American voices framed the deployment as a threat to democracy, as the first step toward authoritarian drift. News anchors in Europe called it dangerous militarization. Reports in Paris painted the mobilization as instability itself. Yet none of these same voices applied the same language when NATO expanded troop deployments across Eastern Europe. There the headlines read, necessary, defensive, stabilizing. This, my friends, is the double standard laid bare. When NATO moves, it is strategy. When Africa moves, it is crisis. The action is the same. The narrative is not. And narratives matter. They shape how ordinary people, whether in America, in Africa, or across the diaspora, understand the meaning of sovereignty. But here lies a hidden twist. The louder the Western press condemns, the more local citizens rally behind their leader. In Ouagadougou, shopkeepers hang Traoré's photo because foreign headlines call him reckless. Pride grows in proportion to criticism. And the more they attack, the stronger the shield of legitimacy becomes at home. This is not unfamiliar to Americans themselves. In the United States, surveys show that when foreign governments criticize American policy, public support often rises for that very policy. It is a human instinct. You may quarrel with your family in private, but when an outsider insults them, you close ranks. So the global reaction, far from weakening Traoré, has strengthened him. France mutters. Washington warns. ECOWAS hesitates. But in Burkina Faso, the voice of the people grows louder. Still, we cannot ignore the weight of history. Outside voices insist that democracy is under threat. Inside voices insist that dignity is finally being restored. Both cannot be true at once. And yet both echo across the headlines of our time. And so the question lingers. When history looks back, will it remember Captain Ibrahim Traoré as the man who endangered democracy, or as the man who awakened it? 40,000 troops. For Burkina Faso, one of the poorest nations on earth, the scale is staggering. But scale alone does not measure impact. Impact is measured in daily life. In villages once abandoned at dusk, markets now stay open past sunset. In towns where children once hurried home from school with fear in their eyes, they now linger on the roads, laughing, walking together. A mother in the north no longer hides her children under the bed at night. Instead, she hears only the chorus of crickets. That shift from fear to routine, from survival to dignity, is the true fruit of this mobilization. Inside the country, the atmosphere is a mixture of pride and cautious relief. Ordinary people feel seen at last. Their government is not asking outsiders to defend them, but is standing in the dust with them. The soldier at the roadside is not a stranger from abroad. He is a neighbor, a cousin, a son, and that makes all the difference. But outside the borders, the reaction is another story. Analysts in Paris, London, and Washington weigh the risks. They ask, will this bold move isolate Burkina Faso? Will it provoke more conflict? Will it turn Traoré into a strongman rather than a servant of the people? These questions hang heavy in foreign capitals, even as the answers inside the country seem clearer. This is where the paradox deepens. For the Burkinabe, sovereignty has begun to look real. Soldiers in the streets, gold under guard, children sleeping without fear. For outsiders, sovereignty looks suspicious, even dangerous. Which vision will history honor? The truth is, the road ahead is not simple. 40,000 troops can build walls of protection, but they can also build walls of isolation. Will those walls stand as barriers, cutting the nation off? Or will they stand as symbols, showing Africa that dignity does not need permission to rise? Brothers and sisters, this is where we stand. Between past dependency and future independence, between fear and faith, between suspicion abroad and pride at home. And when the dust of today settles, history will ask not how many soldiers marched, but what they meant. Was this the chapter of overreach or the chapter of awakening? That answer belongs not to Paris or Washington, but to the people of Burkina Faso themselves. My brothers and sisters, sovereignty is not a speech. Sovereignty is not a line on a map. Sovereignty is the mother who sleeps without fear. It is the teacher who sends his students home in peace. It is the shopkeeper who keeps the lights on past midnight because soldiers stand guard outside. That is sovereignty lived, not sovereignty imagined. For too long, Africa was told, you cannot stand, you cannot protect yourself, you cannot own your wealth. And for too long, many believed it. But today, in the dust of Burkina Faso, we have witnessed a rebuke to that lie. We have seen boots that belong not to foreign powers but to African sons. We have seen hands that once signed contracts in Paris replaced by hands that defend gold for their own children. This is why Ibrahim Traoré news matters, because it is not just about one man or one nation. It is about rewriting the story of Africa in real time. It is about a continent choosing to act rather than ask, to stand rather than wait. And yet, let us be honest, the road ahead is heavy. Challenges remain. Risks are real. But dignity has been awakened, and once awakened, dignity does not sleep again. So I ask you, my brothers and sisters across the diaspora, across America, across the world, do you believe sovereignty is strengthened by force or by trust? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters in this global conversation. And before you leave, hear me clearly. Hit that subscribe button right now. Do not let Africa's story be buried under someone else's headlines. Stay with us because tomorrow's chapter will rise here first. This is not just Ibrahim Traoré news. This is Burkina Faso news. This is the news of a people daring to believe in themselves again. And perhaps when history turns its pages, it will not only remember the noise of critics abroad, but the silence of fear ending at home.